Before we begin, as indicated in the registration for this gathering, by attending the Zoom webinar, you acknowledge that this session will be recorded and may be used for future UAGC presentations. Welcome. We know you have many choices when selecting your professional development activities, and there are some amazing opportunities here at the University of Arizona Global Campus and beyond. We are happy that you chose to join us today as the UAGC Department of Education and Liberal Arts proudly presents to you Ed Talks. I'm Dr. Jessie Upshaw, and I am honored to lead the Professional Development Committee of the Department of Education and Liberal Arts here in the UAGC College of Arts and Sciences. I'll be your host this afternoon. Today, we launch our 8th annual Ed Talks series. For those of you that are new to Ed Talks, this is not your traditional professional development webinar. Ed Talks are fashioned after TED Talks, the ever popular way of sharing concepts through personal storytelling. Our 2022 Ed Talks series is entitled The Power of One, Empower Our Students, which provides a foundation in the online higher education environment to develop and foster the power of meeting students where they are in their classrooms through course design, instruction, and interactions with students to support skills that can transcend the online higher education classroom and stay with them after they've met their goals. Can you go to the next slide for me, Allie? Thank you. Today's session is entitled Finding Your Power to Empower. Here to explore and extend the UAGC's Power of One with her story of how empathy and action combine with power to empower students in the classroom is Dr. Allison Reif. As you listen to Allison's story, you might listen for your call to action to share your practices that support a culture of care and empowerment in your classroom and interactions with students and colleagues. Or perhaps you'll find a new practice that her story or our discussion sparks for you. Allie, will you say hello as I introduce you?
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for being here. Dr. Allison Reif is an associate professor and associate director in the Academic Engagement Center at the University of Arizona Global Campus, or UAGC. Dr. Reif began her career as an elementary and preschool teacher. She maintains a national board certification and was awarded Teacher of the Year for both the Los Angeles Unified School District and Los Angeles County. Within higher education, she has experience launching new programs and revising existing programs, developing courses, providing professional development, and working with collaborative teams across the university. Currently, Allison is a member of the Change Advisory Group, Student Conduct and Community Standards Committee, Forbes Center for Women's Leadership, Turn the Tide, and oversees the partnership with No Excuses University Schools. Allison notes that as a mom of two, she spends a lot of time at Little League games and trying hard not to eat her daughter's inventory of Girl Scout cookies, which I can relate to. Thanks so much for being here today, Dr. Reif.
Thank you for having me.
Allison, I'm now going to ask that we remove our videos so we can get started after a few brief reminders. As a reminder, Ed Talks are fashioned after TED Talks, the ever popular way of sharing personal stories for only 18 minutes of monologue. We do this because we want to hear your stories, and we can best do that by sharing our stories. Our goal here is not necessarily to teach you anything new, as you are already an expert in your field. Our goal is to perhaps motivate you to try something new in your approach to helping your students succeed. Our storytelling approach is geared to not take a lot of your time, but rather to simply set the stage for an interactive conversation and perhaps encourage you to encourage your students in some new way. At the end of our Ed Talk today, we look forward to hearing your story of what you are doing or will do in your classroom or educational setting. After Dr. Reif's story, we will invite all participants to share your reflection and practices. So with that said, audience members, if you could please hold your comments and chat to the end as we listen to Allison's story. Allie, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Jessie. As I share my story with you here today, please keep these questions in mind. And on that note, buckle up. We're going to be taking a bus ride. As an educator, you learn to despise the word duty. No, not that word, not the one with the 2 O's and the 2 D's. Although as a preschool teacher, that isn't your favorite word either, but I digress. The one I'm speaking of is D-U-T-Y, as in a task that someone is required to perform. When you think of the Queen and her royal duties, It sounds very prestigious and probably includes some official waving while riding in a car wearing very expensive jewelry. Or maybe you're connected to the military and think of duty as a way of serving your country. Neither of these examples are what come to mind when educators hear the word duty. I wish I could unmute you all right now and ask for an amen from all my classroom teacher friends. When we think of duty, we think of things like recess duty. This is when you're the sole adult standing out on blacktop, trying to keep full-on anarchy at bay with a whistle, and if you're lucky, a big sun hat. Or maybe you prefer lunch duty. I will say that lunch duty at the school year is much better than the beginning because you don't understand what it's like to have to open 100 individual milk cartons for the kindergartners who have never seen this invention. There is no juice box. It's the big time now. But if you're lucky, you might just end up on bus duty when it's field trip day. Let me set the scene for you in what it was like on field trip day for my school. I taught in South Los Angeles, where all the students lived in about a 4-block radius of the school. There were no school buses for the kids. They were expected to walk to school. This is a pretty common trait for Southern California schools. The worst weather we get is some rain and maybe a dead palm frond falling off a palm tree. This makes bus duty rare, and it is associated with a lot of excitement. Riding on a big yellow school bus means an escape from the routine school day. It means going someplace novel and exploring without the watchful eyes of your parents. It is freedom, and they would love it. There were games of I Spy taking place, elaborate hand clapping routines that even I knew from my childhood, like Miss Mary Mack being taught across the big, slippery green seats. And the jokes, endless amounts of really bad knock-knock jokes. And for me, my favorite part, besides when they would fall asleep on the bus on the way home, was when they would all shout out my name and want to point out a landmark that they knew and that held significance to them. That's my granny's house. That's where my babysitter lives. That's where I go to church. This was so nice for me because I was not part of their community beyond the 4-block radius of their school. I stuck out like a sore thumb, a white face with blonde highlighted hair among a sea of beautiful shades of mahogany, hickory, caramel, and deep ebony. But bus duty on the day I want to share with you was not the normal cacophony of excitement. In fact, I will never forget how when I walked on the bus, the school bus driver made eye contact, shook his head as he dropped it into his hands. And while I had been on endless bus trips to the LA Zoo, the La Brea tar pits, college campuses, and even once to the mountains to take our 5th graders to a week of sleepaway camp, this day's trip was an unknown location for me. We had a new itinerary, one that I had never traveled before, both in reality and metaphorically. We were going to church, which may sound strange for a public school, but today we were going to an African Methodist Episcopal church for a funeral. Not for a carnival, not for a fall festival, not for a canned food drive, but for a funeral. And I will never, ever forget bus duty on this day. The kids filed in one by one, not fighting about who they got to sit next to or who got the window seat. They climbed those 3 steps, bumped into the next available seat. We were attending Omar's funeral, a 5th grader at our school, the brother of a boy in my class. None of the normal expressions of death seemed to work to convey his story. He did not pass away. He did not lose his life. He slowly suffered from a debilitating illness. He was wrenched from this world through a series of needless adult acts that should never be part of a child's story. And his brother lived, escaped from the horrible event because he was able to unlatch his seatbelt and run. He ran for his life in what you and I would consider a battlefield, and they considered him lucky. But tell that to a third grader who lost his only brother, the brother he tried to help, the older brother who he took care of because he was the more capable of the two, the one he tried to save but had to leave in order to save himself. When we entered the church, we found they saved a spot for us so that we could all sit together as a community. We sat in the section where the choir would normally sit at this church, which was behind the pulpit, behind the minister. We had a huge stained glass window behind us, almost looming in its size. We sat facing the rest of the congregation, and everything flowed toward us. And everything was white. The flowers, the linens, and the tiny white coffin containing a boy who was not given the chance to grow into the man he was meant to be. I watched Omar's mother, also wearing white, walk down the aisle, bearing the weight of the loss of her son. Head down, shoulders slumped, barely moving under the weight of each step. But she was being led by the hand of her remaining son, my student and my student's peer. This took place over 20 years ago, and when I close my eyes, I can still recall every detail. How could I not? Sitting where we were, we watched everything progress straight towards us. We saw everyone's faces, the grimaces, the tears, the pain of broken people. It was almost too much to bear. I kept thinking about my students and how they will move on from this moment. How do you come to grips with an 11-year-old being gunned down as a result of his father's decisions? How do you grow out of losing your peer in elementary school? I don't think you grow out of it. Unfortunately, I think you grow into it. As a way to distract my heart from the overwhelming emotion unfolding, I let my eyes follow the rainbow light cast by the stained glass behind me. I watched as the bright, warm colors bounced off the palette of white. I watched them dance over the faces of my students surrounding me. They tickled the nose of Joelle, created patterns on Kimberly's bright pink dress, and caused Angel to blink his eyes repeatedly. But my eyes stopped on Yesenia. I could tell that she was as mesmerized by the light as I was. She was moving her hands ever so slightly, as though watching the colors ripple across her little hands. I had the wonderful opportunity of looping with this class, teaching them in second grade and taking them through third grade. We aren't supposed to have favorites as teachers, but this class was definitely my favorite. And Yesenia, she was as well. I had taught her older brother, and I would go on to teach her younger one. She was the middle child, quiet, reserved, but brimming with compassion, inquisitiveness, and determination. Her parents were immigrants. Her dad started his own landscaping business, and her mom stayed at home with the kids and sold Tupperware in Avon on the side. Her parents were quiet like she was. English wasn't their first language, but they were always there to support their children and provide them the opportunity that they could. As I sat there looking at the stark, cold white in front of me and the bright, colorful light behind me, I kept wondering how we ended up here. We had traveled so far from our daily life. I was supposed to be opening milk cartons or overseeing yard duty. I realized as I sat in the funeral of a grade school boy that my teacher preparation program did nothing to prepare me to be here. This was not included in my job description. Attending a student's funeral was not a bullet point under the required skills section. Being pastoral was simply not listed. But you know what? I wouldn't have chosen to be elsewhere. I was surrounded by my students, taking part in their life events, being a part of our class community. The bus ride home was much the same as there. The air hung heavy in the afternoon, but so did our hearts. I saw lots of heads slumped together, just like I usually do on the way home. However, they were not sleeping. Instead, they were finding comfort in the closeness of their peers. We got back to school before the day was over, and I kept wondering how the day was not over. We just buried a child. What more could be done? This was not a time for long division. This was not a time for possessive nouns. Instead, we talked about the beautiful stained glass window that had us all mesmerized. I got out black construction paper and some colored tissue paper. I showed the class how to cut out different shapes and patterns from 2 sheets of paper sandwiched together. They had different colored tissue paper in between the sheets of their designs, and we glued it all together. The students had made their own stained glass. We decided to hang them all together in the window that was next to our classroom library. It resembled a quilt, with each square made by a different student. Our version of the stained glass window hung in the classroom for the rest of the year. I was slightly worried that this would be a sad reminder for the students, but it was anything but. At the end of the school year, as we cleaned everything up, people asked for a bit of the window. No one ended up with their own creation. At that point, it didn't really matter. They wanted a piece of the beautiful bright colors and a memory of our community. And we, of course, let Dion choose first. As I stated at the beginning, I was not a part of my students' community beyond the 4-block radius of the school. No one confused me as someone's mom or a neighbor. My role was distinct and obvious to everyone. But on this day, our sense of community traveled outside of our realm. We were injected into a new space, but our community remained intact because it was within us. Our community was moving. It was mobile. It was not that different from our virtual online learning community. You enter their homes through a computer. You might not be connected to their community in any other way, but they are a part of your community. It is the community you create together. And just like I kept wondering, how did we end up here? So too might you wonder this. So too might your students wonder this. But that is the amazing thing. And just with this next statement, but I don't think it's anyone's first choice to go to school as an adult with so many obligations, jobs, kids, aging parents, throw in a pandemic, and add in a war. But it doesn't matter if it isn't their first choice. What matters is that they are here. They each have a unique story that brought them to us at this time in their lives. We can either rejoice in their journey, or we can focus on policy and red tape. We can either act as a referee and count down those points for each tardy assignment, or we can empower them to continue writing their story. As I sat down to write my ed talk, I knew I wanted to share Omar's story, not to sensationalize a horrific event, not to denigrate the community where I worked that was so full of beautiful things, but also an environment that was pushed to the brink at times, and not to cause you, the listener, sadness or pain. Instead, I wanted to paint you a complete picture of the characters in my story. Omar, who was a beautiful soul who didn't get a full opportunity to shine. His brother, Dion, who put up a very tough facade, but would often crumble under the pain of his young life. His mother, who shut out the world, but would sometimes give you a glimpse of her old self, the woman she was before the tragedy. And then there was Yesenia. Remember the one who was my not to be spoken out loud favorite? I don't want to end on loss, so let me share about Yesenia. A few years ago, I received a LinkedIn request which is not typically a thing of joy. You should have seen my face when I opened up the message. Here, all grown and professional, was Yesenia. She wanted to connect with me, her old teacher. She was attending UC San Diego, my alma mater. She had a scholarship studying computer science. She was on the leadership board for Women in Computing. She was participating in women-centered hackathons and was a designer for an open access interdisciplinary research journal at UCSD. This girl, this now woman, had not just made it to college, but she was kicking ass. She was still quiet and reserved, but she was thriving. And it made me think, did her professors ever wonder how she ended up in La Jolla? Did they know all that she lived through in her years in South Los Angeles? Did they understand the weight of her backpack, the weight of all the obstacles that she had to overcome to get there? I'm guessing there weren't that many. She wouldn't have asked for help. She was probably the shy student in the front who was always there, but never ventured to use her voice. But I think there must have been someone who asked about her story, someone who served as a mentor or a support network at this place that was very different from our home. I want to think that someone took the time to not just help shoulder the weight of her backpack, but to also help defray the obstacles along her pathway to success. And all it takes is just one. The power of one is incredible. Does that mean that they decreased the rigor, coddled her, dropped their standards? Not at all. It just means that someone took the time to meet her where she was. And that is precisely what we ask of our faculty, to meet our students where they are, understanding who they are and what brought them here. We can't fully know all our students' stories or have experienced all the things that they collectively have gone through before they got to us. We might not always know, but we can understand. We can do things a little differently. UAGC is promoting a shift that starts with us meeting our students at the door, accepting what they bring in their proverbial backpacks, and supporting their learning through a culture of care. Our faculty and staff are committed to student care, and that commitment is reflected in our culture at UAGC. Our culture embraces academic challenges, holistic learning, and personal development. We believe in offering our students unwavering, caring support while still practicing accountability. To support that goal, we ask you to join us in implementing the UAGC culture of care. The hallmarks of the UAGC culture of care are a proactive strategy for student communications, an empathetic mindset towards students' hardships, a flexible attitude toward assignments, and a streamlined approach to university policies that directly support student success. We know that many of you already employ these strategies and lots of others in your dedication to support students. This initiative isn't meant to inhibit you from supporting your students in ways that you know are effective. We aren't revolutionizing how you support our students, but instead, we are systematizing it. Formalizing the culture of care ensures that our tools and processes align with the UAGC mission and vision. By naming and prioritizing the culture of care and the power of one, we are creating a support system for our students and providing guidance for you to support them effectively. As I reflect back on my time as a teacher of children, my mind can't help but make the jump from having those students as kids to having them as adults. I know that Yesenia is the ultimate success story. Not everybody was able to do what she did. But man, wouldn't it be incredible if you opened up your class roster and saw Dion's name? Or even better yet, that of his mother. Knowing that they are bringing extremely heavy backpacks, that their road to us was not paved and well tended, but rejoicing in the amazing fact that they are here. I can't change what happened before they turned on their computer, but I have the power to impact their lives for the good. That is all we ask of you, whether you're here at UAGC or joining us from elsewhere. Yes, focus on the course learning outcomes. Yes, focus on ensuring they understand content, but also embrace their stories, embrace their experiences, and allow them the flexibility to make their dreams come true. Empower them to go on and change their own trajectory. And back to you, Jessie.
Wow. Thank you, Allie, so much for lifting up the stories of Omar, Dion, and Yesenia, for setting the stage for reflecting on what role we all play in creating and maintaining a culture of care in our interactions with our students, no matter where they are in their lifelong learning path. For setting up our discussion on meeting students where they are and acknowledging that while we might not be able to see how heavy that backpack is that they're carrying with them, we know that each student carries their story and their goals to each interaction we might have with them. Allison has posed some questions here for us to consider as we reflect on our own practice, looking through the lens of empowering our students. For those of you here today, as we open up the chat lines to consider your takeaways from today's story, let's frame our discussion. What are you currently doing in your practice to support student success? And what are you inspired to do next? Thinking of that power of one, can your students count on you? Please start sharing your impression, your ideas, or perhaps your new approach in the chat. Be sure your chat is set to everyone. Or we would love to hear from you. So if you'd like to join us using your audio, please raise your hand using the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. And we will then be given the opportunity to unmute your microphone and share your own reflection on the story that way. We invite you to join the conversation now to inspire others with your story. I'm seeing a lot of response, and I have the same emotional response of thinking of many students in my classroom when I was in a K-12 classroom, as well as our current students. And it's hard not to be moved by the story and just remember where they're all coming from. I see a hand raised. Julie, you should have the floor, Julie.
Hi. So I just wanted to make two comments. The first is, back in the heyday of colleges, so to speak, traditional on-ground campuses embedded in our culture for years, if not, a century or two. One of the functions of college was to finish creating students, finish what the parents of students had already begun, and to kind of take over from parents and then finish molding these students into good citizens of the country or whatever, and of the world. And I've always struggled with how to do that in an online environment. And there have been various proposals over the years, including I think we have now a little bit of a student union and this and that, but this one thing, this culture of care, this focusing on what was presented here, the stories that each student who walks through our door has with them, like this is a way to get to touch every student, and to fulfill that mission of what colleges are supposed to do, in society. So I just love that. Of course, I'm so glad there's not a video of me because I was crying like a big old baby. And like, I just want to say how amazing and, I was wondering where the tie-in would come, like this, such a compelling, beautiful story, but the tie-in was perfect. And so I just wanted to share those thoughts out loud.
Thank you, Julie. I think your point about, I love the way you termed it, finishing these young adults in taking over for their parents. And I agree that that was a huge piece of the college experience, but it's not a huge piece of our own. They've been molded and had their experiences. And I think we have to frame it from, we aren't going to be the ones who finished those experiences. We're the ones who can embrace those experiences and help them to, go on to earn the degree that they came here for a reason, very intentionally at this point in their lives. To enter a college classroom, they must be motivated for something big, I think. So trying to figure out and uncover what that big element is a great way to motivate them, and also to build a connection between ourselves and them, so that we're part of the joy and excitement that goes along with that.
Thank you so much, Julie. I see in the chat as well, Louise is speaking to reflecting on all the stories that she hears and the heavy pieces of the backpack. So glad to see those connections drawing it. Hearing Allison's story just has so many faces and names going through my head of all of the courses and all of the students and all of the stories in the backpacks.
It reminds me of a story we were at. It might have been our last in-person graduation before we started going virtual. And we had a student in our Department of Education who had come from, I want to say the Bahamas or Barbados. She had come from very far. She just suffered huge tragedy with a storm, lost her house. People were sick. And she somehow made it to graduation. And I see Jessie shaking her. I know you talked to her as well. We all talked to her because we just couldn't believe how much she'd put into getting herself physically to graduation, because it meant so much for her to walk across that stage. And I think if we can muster that as we grade discussions or run a Turnitin report and have a teachable moment with a student, it makes it so much more fulfilling for us to have that big picture of who they are as people and why they're here.
So yes, I remember her well. I'll never forget her face. That's or her story for sure. I see in the chat here, Kelly mentions some announcements for students to meet and chat about their program and their experiences, and having that opportunity to have that one-on-one, face-to-face connections, and the video opportunity of really not only hearing their stories, but actually hearing their stories, seeing their faces, giving them opportunities to share. I think that's an amazing practice to bring in, to connect one at a time.
Jackie, I see you there. 1 second before I lose track of the chat because it moves so quickly. Cindy brought up that it's important to remember that we all carry a backpack. Cindy, I couldn't agree with you more. Part of this culture of care that we speak about extends to our faculty, to our staff, to everyone that we interact with. We need to be embracing all of everyone's life experiences and what that means in the moment, and being flexible, not just with our students, but with our faculty and staff as well. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Jackie, would you like to share? So you pop on.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just want to say that this is to me a testament of exactly what everybody else is saying regarding the backpack. And we've heard before about that starting block as if this were a race. And I think this is a testament of exactly putting into perspective the race in education. We never know where they're going to start. And this is a very true and resonating example of that. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that analogy as well. I'm seeing some mention here about how the culture of care in the online environment is coming through even more than the traditional environment. Jennifer especially emphasizes the technological age providing different opportunities to engage our students and really focusing on the whole student. And I think that's really the key here, is looking at the student, the backpack, how we change as Allison presented the questions, how are we changing our routine duty to actually respect and look at the whole student and what they're carrying with them, and what are we highlighting in our online windows of their accomplishments, and just helping lift up what's already there.
And lots of mentioned the support services. Part of this initiative is to really get our services that we offer our students in the forefront and have everybody understand what they are, what we can do for students, the best way to connect them with help. And I think that's really important as well, because we are one and we're powerful, but we have just so many lines coming out of all of our departments of all these amazing resources. So if we can tap into those and help each other support our students. And I don't know about you, but I live in San Diego and I might not know the best resource for a student who's looking for housing in Texas. That's not my strength, obviously. So if I actually have the network to find them the person that can help them, then we can work as a group, a unified front, to provide our students with what they need. And I understand that I'm providing them with content and knowledge, but if you're looking for home and security, that does nothing for you. So at least I can provide them with a person who can meet their needs at the time that they need them.
That wraparound and approaching the whole student is what I'm hearing you say. And, I'm also seeing in the chat here many mentions of who our students are and pieces of their stories. We have, as you mentioned in your story, Allison, the multiple life responsibilities that our students are balancing on top of the global situations that are going on, and then local situations, personal situations, first generation to start an undergraduate degree, first generation to start a graduate degree, first generation to become a PhD or an EdD or whatever it is they may be pursuing. There's so many stories and so many things that affect how they come into that classroom. And you mentioned that feeling safety and security first. We know you can't learn if you're not feeling safe and secure. And so we have to look at the whole student, their whole situation, and really approach our culture of care in that way. And that's the themes I'm seeing in all of these discussions. Well, all great things must come to an end, including this one. So I'm going to ask that we will continue this conversation, and we will continue to have this conversation throughout this Ed Talk series. But I would ask for us to pause for just a moment. If you will watch your chat box for a link, or watch your screen as we move to the next slide, we will share with you where our Ed Talks are recorded, and you can also access certificates of participation in that place. We want to acknowledge the work of Dr. Donna Beagle in Communications Across Barriers, as well as members of the UAGC community for the dedication to the work of Power of One and our culture of care. Please do mark your calendars though, and continue to join us as we explore further on the third Thursday, same time, same place, to continue our series and discussion. And on that note, next up in April, please come back and see us, where we will hear Dr. Ashante Aller as she shares her story of barriers of academic language. We thank you so much for joining us today, and a huge thank you to Dr. Allison Reef for sharing with us to inspire the next steps in supporting our students and each other. On behalf of our department chair, Dr. Denise Maxwell, and UAGC's College of Arts and Sciences Department of Education and Liberal Arts, we wish you a safe, healthy, and impactful March, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everyone.